Hey there, Agile Dust Bunnies, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, a podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. Today, I want to talk about Scrum teams that want to switch to Kanban. Now, it's also applicable for Kanban teams that want to switch to Scrum. It's just that that does not happen very often for whatever reason. But this is a situation that I think most Scrum masters, developers, etc., experience at some point or another, especially for organizations that might be kind of new in their agile journey or their journey with Scrum. You have a team and you start doing Scrum and there's things about it that they don't like. You start running into obstacles with it. Everyone's feeling bad. And then somebody reads a blog about Kanban, or someone listens to this Agile podcast, or someone finds me on LinkedIn and they go, "Oh, Phil Ledgerwood, he's so cool. And he does Kanban, and I want to be just like him, so we should do Kanban instead." I'm almost positive that last thing has happened, probably like at least one time, I think. Do you think so? I don't know. Anyway, but the point is that inevitably someone finds out about Kanban, and then it becomes like their savior. Oh, we don't have to do this tedious and restrictive Scrum anymore. Now we can do Kanban, which is magical Christmas land for people who don't like structure, right? Now we can finally do whatever we want in the lovable software development anarchy that we all wish we could live in. This happens to a lot of teams, actually. If it's happening with your team, you are definitely not alone. It happens quite a bit, usually pretty early on, because teams, as they work in Scrum, especially if Scrum is new, there's a lot of new things. There's a lot of rules. There's a lot of events. There's things that you used to do that you got to stop doing. There's things that you've never done before that you have to start doing. There's daily Scrums in the beginning and sprint planning, which is like hell on earth for most teams that have never done sprint planning before. And I hear you, but we're going to talk about, does it make sense then to switch to something like Kanban from Scrum? Is that your best way out? And if so, what are the things that you need to think about if you decide to make that transition? That's what today's going to be about. So let's talk about the decision to switch frameworks. And again, a lot of this is applicable if you're going from Kanban to Scrum. It's just for whatever reason, that's not the most common direction people go. I think it's mostly because Scrum is way, way, way more popular than Kanban is. So it's much more common to find a Scrum team that wants to go to Kanban than it is to find a Kanban team that wants to start doing Scrum. Here's the main thing that I want to say to you. I don't know if switching strategies is the right approach for your team, but I can tell you this, that you can't framework switch your way out of underlying problems. And I think this is something that's very, very important to keep in mind. When you're thinking about, for instance, things in your life that you wish were different, either like your habits or your relationships or different circumstances that seem to keep cropping up. A lot of times when people are facing problems in their life, they start thinking about changing something external in their environment. If I had a new job, I would be happier, right? Or if I had a new place to live, I would be happier, or a new family or whatever it is, like if I just changed this thing externally about my life, that would just solve all my problems. And sometimes changing those external things is exactly what you need to do. Don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying don't change those things necessarily, but here's the thing. You can't outrun yourself. If you move to a different country, if you change to a different job, if you get into a new relationship, the one common factor in all those situations is you're still who you are. And whatever underlying things you may be struggling with as a person, changing your external circumstances is not going to change those issues or help you with those issues. You may be able to mask them for a while or put yourself in a situation where those issues are not as aggravated, but you're not really addressing some of the underlying things. Like, why do I want to live in a different country so badly? Why do I want to be in a different relationship so badly? Why do I want to be in a different job so badly? It may be that you are struggling with something that you yourself are dealing with, and you want to deal with that underlying issue before you bring it into a new set of circumstances. Well, teams are this way, right? Like if you have issues on your team, then changing frameworks or strategies is not going to get rid of those underlying issues. Or as an organization, if you are struggling with mindsets or values or ways of working that are incompatible with agility, then swapping out to a new framework isn't going to do it. And I see organizations do this all the time. They embrace some kind of framework. It doesn't do what they were hoping, so they ditch it and they embrace a new one. And that doesn't work. Well, maybe we didn't scale it, so let's do safe. And then that doesn't work. Well, maybe we need something with fewer rules, so let's do Kanban. And the thing is they framework switch, but they never deal with the underlying issues. So that's something I want to throw out there, is you can't framework switch your way out of underlying problems. I'll give you a very concrete example. I worked with a team one time with one of our clients. They were starting a new project. We talked about different ways to approach it. They decided that they wanted to do Kanban. Believe it or not, I was actually advocating for Scrum for a number of reasons, which I realize does not sound like my bag, but I really thought that was the best fit for this team in this circumstance. But they wanted to try Kanban, so they did. And before long, they had blown out their WIP limits. They just had stuff in progress, 2-3 cards for every single person on the team. And this obviously created a lot of problems. Nothing was getting done. And so they thought, wow, we made a big mistake doing Kanban here because we're just pulling in cards. We're not respecting our WIP limits. How about we do Scrum? Because in Scrum, you have to do sprint planning and you have to figure out how much work can fit into a smaller time box. We're all kind of more used to thinking in those terms. So we'll do Scrum and that will solve our WIP limit problems. It may surprise you to discover that this solved nothing, that the same developers who kept pulling in too much work in spite of their Kanban WIP limits also repeatedly pulled in too much work despite the fact that they continued to overcommit from sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint. It just changed nothing, right? Because they never dealt with the underlying issue, which is we start work faster than we finish it, and we need to make it a shared value that we finish work before we start new work. Now, once you've got that dynamic under control, then yeah, some of these other mechanisms could be very helpful. But if you don't have that dynamic under control, I don't care what you're doing. Waterfall, Kanban, Scrum, Scrumban, XP, Scrum XP, Scrumbani, Kanbani, Safe, whatever. It really doesn't matter. You're still going to have problems with starting work faster than you finish it, no matter what strategy you're using. So keep that in mind, is you can't switch your way out of underlying problems. Another thing to think about is that sometimes your adopted strategy is hard, not because the strategy sucks, but because you suck, or at least you suck right now. As many of you know, I teach martial arts at a local MMA gym, and on occasion we have people come who are in it for the first time. They are practicing something that we're doing in class. It is difficult for them, and so they stop. I remember we had a student come in one time and we were doing something. He tried it 2 or 3 times and he stopped and he wouldn't do the drill anymore. And I asked him why, and he said, well, because Bruce Lee says that if something doesn't work for you, you should just ditch it. And I thought, well, it's one thing for Bruce Lee to decide that because he's Bruce Lee, but you're a dude who just started today, right? And the reason the technique is hard isn't because the technique is a bad technique for you. It's because you suck at it. And if you were to work with this technique and become good at it, then you might discover that the technique was actually really good, but you're not in a good position to make that decision right now because you're terrible at it. And that's the thing, right? Whether you're doing Scrum or Kanban or whatever you're doing, your dysfunctions will create points of tension with strategies that are designed around agility or are designed around lean principles. Anything that you do that runs counter to that goal, you're going to experience pain and tension with whatever you've decided. Yes, sometimes you will feel pain and tension because you picked the wrong framework or the wrong strategy. That is a real thing, and that may be what you're experiencing. But it's at least worth asking the retrospective question, are we experiencing pain because this framework is dumb, or are we experiencing this pain because we have underlying practices and values that are causing tension with this framework? Because a lot of times discomfort is the price of improvement. I hate working out. Like, I hate it. I hate it. There is almost nothing else I wouldn't rather be doing than lifting weights or doing cardio. And if you were to get a good look at me, you would know that was the case almost immediately. But let's pretend like we're not being insulting, and I'm just letting you know. I do lift weights, I do cardio, and I despise it all the time. It doesn't feel good. It hurts. I feel like I'm wasting my time. I would much rather be doing anything else, right? Even other productive things. I would rather fold laundry than work out. I would rather vacuum than work out. I hate it, but I do it. And the reason why I do it is because that discomfort is the gateway to improvement. Eventually, those weights that I'm lifting are going to be easier. And eventually, those distances that I'm running are going to come more easily to me. Now, the problem with exercise is once you hit that, then you have to make it hard again. And hopefully when it comes to workflow processes, they just get easy and then life is good. But you see what I mean? The discomfort is the toll of improvement. Pain is weakness leaving the body. Well, sometimes pain is weakness leaving your organization. That's why we tell people, like if your software releases are painful, do it more often, because the more often you do those releases, you will have to do things that will make it less and less and less and less painful until eventually releases are easy. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you're actually finding that framework to be restrictive because you're just not very good right now. And you will be. And it may be worth sticking with that framework or sticking with that strategy so that you can be changed by it, you can be transformed by it, and you can start to reap the benefits the framework was going to bring you to begin with. Kind of the last hard truth I would like your team to think about before you decide to jump ship is that Scrum was designed for a particular kind of situation. It was not meant to be a generically agile approach to software development. So that's one thing I do want to throw out there. I think it is very possible for software teams to pick Scrum and Scrum is the wrong thing. It's very possible. In fact, this may be an unpopular opinion, but I would probably say that most software teams doing Scrum right now, it's probably not an ideal fit for their situation because Scrum was actually forged in the fires of a landscape where you are trying to innovate at speed in a competitive market. So Scrum comes from the new product game, which is basically like when you're trying to compete in a market full of photocopiers and a market full of cameras, how do you build your photocopiers and cameras in a way that has a competitive advantage? Well, you have to develop it more efficiently than your competitors, but you also have to innovate. You have to do things with photocopiers and cameras that your competitors are not doing. And so Scrum was developed as a process to help these manufacturing companies innovate at speed, right? Innovate in an efficient manner and build in an efficient manner. So think about your software project. Scrum is a great fit for projects where you don't really know what the next thing is. You are still coming up with the product as you go. You are designing the plane as you're building the plane, right? So I may only know a sprint or two out of what we plan to put into this product. And then I need to see how the market is responding. Even if the market is my internal users, I need to see how the market is responding to decide what goes into the product next. If you have a backlog with 100 things in it, or you have like more than 3 sprints planned out, that might be your cue that Scrum is not the right fit, because Scrum is really designed for those environments where I am figuring the software out as I go. I don't know what this product is going to be a month from now or 5 months from now. I need the market to tell me so that I can make decisions about what to put in and what to leave out. So the closer you are to that situation, the more valuable Scrum is. The further away you are from that situation, the less valuable Scrum is. So here's the kicker. If you're in a situation where Scrum is a really good fit, it is really hard to abandon it for something else because it was really designed for that situation. It's like if you're working with hazmat materials and you're wearing a hazmat suit and you're like, hey, this suit is really bulky, it's hard to move around in. I think I want to wear a scuba diving suit instead, or I want to wear a chicken suit or whatever. You can't just swap it out, right? You're working with hazardous materials. You need a hazmat suit for that. If you're not working with hazardous materials, why are you wearing a hazmat suit, right? And so that's something that's worthy of discussion with your team, right? If you're doing Scrum, ideally it's because your situation fits Scrum. And if your situation fits Scrum, you probably want to try to stick with it at least for a while and before you decide it's not the right thing for you. If you can just as easily swap out Scrum for Kanban or some other framework, you probably never needed to use Scrum in the first place. So that's something to consider. So with those things in mind, let me very quickly tell you some good reasons to switch. One, I just alluded to, is that you picked Scrum just because it was out there, but not because you concluded it was the best fit for your situation. I encourage every software development team and every organization trying to increase their agility to do the hard work of asking that question. Why are you doing Scrum, or why are you doing Kanban for that matter? Is it because you thought about the specific outcomes you needed in your specific context, and you decided out of all the ways you could possibly approach this, Scrum was clearly the one that would most effectively get you those outcomes? If the answer was yes, congratulations, you're doing better than 95% of organizations out there, and you should probably stick with Scrum for a while before you jump ship. But if the answer is no, then that may be a cue that switching is exactly what you need to do. Scrum has a lot of overhead built into it that is necessary for an environment where you don't know what you're going to be building next. It's totally unnecessary if you do, right? So it may be that Scrum is not the best fit. So if you're in that situation where you just adopted Scrum because you thought Scrum and Agile were the same thing, or you wanted to be Agile and you knew Scrum was popular, or somebody showed up on your doorstep with an Agile coach hat on and what they knew was Scrum, so that's what you're doing now. Yeah, it's totally appropriate to change frameworks and strategies because you should have never have adopted it in the first place. It just might not fit your situation and something else will fit better. The second thing, and this is a little more subtle, is because sometimes even on the same product, the product moves from a state where it is highly unknown into a state where it is mostly known. Now, there's always uncertainty with every software development project. There's very, very few software projects you can do where you know for a fact, like this feature is going to be in and this feature is going to be out, or 6 months in advance, this is exactly what we're going to be doing. There's always some level, but we can all agree that this level is not the same for every software project that you do, right? Some of them, yeah, you have a pretty good idea that out of the things you want to go in there, 70, 80% of those pretty much going to be in there, right? No matter what you do. And then there's others that are very volatile. You really don't know the direction that they're going to go. And some products start out in a highly unknowable state, but as time goes on, they come into a state where more is known and there's less experimentation that needs to be done. You still may need market feedback, but now you're getting market feedback on very small things. You're not really pivoting product direction. You're not really designing what's in and what's out, or what's this product ultimately going to be. You're not making those big decisions anymore. Now you sort of have a large body of features under your belt. The product kind of is what it's going to be. And now you're just making enhancements and modifications to it. And so the exploratory, the highly experimental nature that Scrum has all these structures that are built for are just not relevant anymore. And in those situations, yeah, I think it is appropriate to decide if you still need all that stuff, if you still need all that apparatus. Again, Scrum has all the stuff in it, the roles and the events. I'm sorry, not the roles, the accountabilities, the events, the artifacts, everything that's in Scrum is built to deal with a highly uncertain, highly volatile market situation. And when that's not your situation anymore, you don't need a lot of that stuff anymore. So that's something to keep in mind too. So either you pick Scrum and you didn't need it, or Scrum might have been the right fit at the beginning of your project, but now that you're a ways into this product's development, you just don't need a lot of that stuff anymore. The domain is no longer complex like it used to be at the beginning. And so a different framework may suit your needs. So I hope that helps. It's a big decision. I highly urge you, don't make the decision just because Scrum has been difficult. There's all kinds of reasons Scrum might be difficult that have nothing to do with it being good. It has to do with your team and how agile you and your organization actually are. So don't jump ship just because like Scrum is hard and we think Kanban's going to be easy, or Scrum has a lot of rules, Kanban doesn't, so let's do that because we'll like that better. That's not a wise way to make that decision. However, there are reasons, appropriate reasons, to make the decision to change frameworks, and I hope that I've given you some tools to have that discussion with your team and decide really what's going to be the best fit for you and your organization. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.